Welcome to Scary Stories. Coming up later this episode, we've got I Saw a Dog Become a Werewolf. But before we get to that one, we've got this other all-new story I hope you will enjoy, which we call Werewolves and Dogs, Real Life Werewolf Pack, or I Can't Forget the Golden Retriever Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm an old man now, I'm happy to say. I consider it an honor and a privilege, since so few of my own generation are still here to argue with me any longer. I've had a lot of crazy adventures, and for the most part I'd like those stories to go with me when it's my time. But there's one particular set of memories that I feel I should set to paper, or I suppose set to email, while I'm still able to do so. And that is my collection of memories of how common it was to see upright walking canines when I was a child, growing up in the woods outside of town. We moved from that place when I was 14, and it wasn't until years later that it dawned on me that I had never seen an upright walking canine of any sort at all since we moved out of that place. In fact, it was one night when I was watching the old David Letterman show on late night after Johnny Carson in the 80s or 90s, when they were doing a segment called Stupid Pet Tricks. That was when I realized people found it amusing to see a dog walking upright. On that TV show, it did look funny to see, but I could have sworn that people where I grew up were used to seeing upright walking canines, including, as I recall, some that had clawed paws that looked more like hands. I contacted my sister, who is a little more than 2 years younger than I am, and quite unfriendly. She likes to be insulting to everyone she talks to, so please know that I suffered in order to get her side of things for this story. Since she was even younger than I was when this all happened, I'm gonna have to say that when we disagree, she must be wrong, and I must be right. Of course, that's not how she sees it, and we do have some points where our memories do not match up with each other at all. Neither of us could remember the place we lived in ever having a name, and I'm not sure it ever did. It was really just one general store, and then some small houses built back in the woods, within walking distance of that store. It was all dirt roads, and I remember the reason we moved was that they had a new paved highway, and the store owners decided to move over there next to the new road instead of this dirt road. I say new, but I believe we're talking about Route 51, which I think they built in the 20s before I was born. They built more of it each year until finally it stopped making sense living where we were. We all cried because our entire little town had to go find somewhere else to live. But our dad got better work after we moved, and we were lucky enough never to have to be that broke ever again. But my main memories of that strange little moment in time all revolve around the upright walking dog creatures. I wish I could say the same for my sister, as she has a different take on that, and we will get to her point of view in a while after I've had time to take some Pepto-Bismol. Where we lived was south of Pine Lake and north of Carter, on a road that may or may not still exist over there. Someone back in the 1990s told me that none of the houses or buildings are still standing, and the only dirt roads that are still walkable are the ones that animals use to get around. There aren't really many people over there anymore. There's no reason for them to be there. But once upon a time, there were 6 or 7 families living there in homes that they helped each other build. My mother used to call them shanty homes. She hated being there, and only had bad things to say once we'd moved away. My dad, though, he saw that place as a little slice of heaven. It was a place to go where nobody cared what you did. To Mom, that meant poverty, but to Dad, it meant freedom. Mom loved being in the city or in the suburbs, but Dad felt like a wage slave working jobs he didn't care about, so that Mom could buy name-brand groceries for us kids. And the way I remember it, Mom didn't like all the upright walking dogs out there too much either. She couldn't put her pies on the windowsill to cool, because the dogs would just stand up on their hind legs and start eating the pie. The way I remembered was that all the upright walkers were golden retrievers. I am not a dog breeder, so when I say golden retriever, I don't know if I mean that literally, or if these were just dogs that looked like them. They were large. They were orange. They had long, sort of curly fur, like golden retrievers, but with thicker and more muscular limbs. My sister says she remembers those, but she also remembers short-haired dogs walking upright. I do not, though. I saw a couple different kinds of bipedal canine creatures, and I will describe them to you. But all the ones I saw walking upright looked like golden retrievers with long flowing blonde hair and floppy ears. If you don't think that sounds intimidating, you must not have known too many full-sized golden retrievers. Their heads are the size of Gertie the dinosaur's head. That's big, in case you didn't catch that reference. A big golden retriever could probably bite your face off in one try, so it's a good thing that these big dogs seem to like pie more than people. So far, my only disagreement with my sister is that she remembers two kinds of dogs that walked on their hind legs in that village we lived in. But she does not remember any of this next part of it at all. Now I remember that some of them had paws that looked like hands. Most of them were really big dogs that stood up and were taller than you. That was bad enough. But there were other ones that looked very weird. They seemed like wolfmen almost, or what people now call dogman. This was in Wisconsin, so maybe dogman is the explanation. But if so, these were long-haired blonde dogmen. They looked just like those golden retrievers in terms of coloring and fur, but they were just so much more human-looking than the majority of them. My sister says I'm making this part up because I'm an old fool, but I just don't think she saw them, that's all. They almost never came into our settlement. They were mostly in the woods surrounding where we were. I would go hunting and scavenging with other boys my age, but my sister was younger and would usually stay home with our mother. That's why I think I saw these things more than she did, and that's why I think she forgot about it. Her idea that I made up the stories because I'm old makes no sense, since I've had these stories in my head since long before my hair turned gray and fell out. When I ask her to explain that part, she just insults me instead and talks over me. I believe we need a referee to score our talks with each other. To my sister, polite conversation is a full-contact competitive sport, where scorched earth is always her go-to opening strategy. And I don't know how she or anyone can claim that Dogman doesn't exist. You can't really prove a negative. You can't prove something doesn't exist. She's just rude, because she thinks if she acts nasty enough, people won't realize how limited her intellect is. Anyway, she does agree with me that dogs in those woods walked around on their hind legs a lot. For some reason, both of us were too young to understand at the time. What I'm asserting in addition to that is that there were things more like werewolves that had to be in some way related to the four-legged kinds of dogs, since the coloring and the fur were just too similar to each other. Now, we boys would actually spy on the creatures when we came across them in the woods. We just wanted to understand what they were. We had no television in those woods in those days, and watching an upright walking golden retriever that seems to have clawed hand-like paws, not ordinary paws, well, that was like the movie of the week to my generation. We had different hand signals in our little group, like stop, or go, or shut up, or come over here. But if you gave the signal in this sort of more dramatic way that we would do it, then that meant it was one of those man-like dogs, the ones we wanted to understand better. To be clear, I'm not saying these were human beings. None of us felt that was what was going on. We were sure these were animals, but we were split as to what kind. I thought they were just the next step on the golden retriever's evolutionary ladder. I felt this was a new species, sort of, and that they were evolving to walk upright, for the same reason we did, so that they could use their front limbs for more than just walking. Someone in our group agreed with me, I forget who, but the more popular idea among the boys my age back then was that these were dogs that turned into werewolves. That might be a little hard to follow, so I'll explain what I mean. You know how, according to werewolf legend, men turn into something between a man and a wolf under the full moon, or whatever the conditions are in that story? Well, my friends felt that these were dogs that, under certain conditions and certain times, would transform into something that seemed halfway between dog and human. They figured if it could happen one way, why not both ways? I never knew if their theory made more sense than mine, but I preferred my own. My theory didn't require one kind of mammal changing into another kind. However, we boys had an agreement that if we ever caught one of the dogs in the act of changing into a werewolf, or caught one of the werewolves turning back into his dog self, that I would be honest, and I would admit they were right. This is why we would all fall silent and hide to watch the upright canines when we found them in the woods. We all had a lot riding on whether they were shapeshifters or not. We watched as these creatures did a whole lot of different things, I will admit to you. We watched them relieve themselves. We watched them eat dead things. We even watched them eat their own poo. But one thing I have to say I've never seen a golden retriever do is transform into a werewolf. And one thing I never saw any of those werewolf dogman things do was change into a golden retriever. But those dogmen were golden retrievers, just ones with shoulders and hands and fingers ending in claws, that's all. We weren't able to figure out exactly what those things were, but we had assumed we'd have our entire lives to figure it out. When the store closed down and we all had to move, it was a sudden thing to us kids, but the adults had been talking about this since before I was born. To them, it was a long time coming when it happened. They had decided that telling us kids in advance wouldn't have accomplished anything except making everyone unhappy. For this reason, they told us at the last second, and we were all too taken by surprise to do much but help the adults pack and move. The parents all did this at the same time on purpose because they knew they'd be breaking up a lot of friendships when the day came. If we knew what was about to happen, I bet some of us boys might have run away and live in the woods like Peter Pan, rather than give up our friendships with each other. In fact, I bet that's what our parents were expecting us to do. And so that was why it had to be a sudden thing, treated as though it were an emergency, and we only had a limited amount of time to pack and move. In fact, they all knew this would happen for 10 years, some of them twice that long. My sister says the road was finished earlier than I'm telling you. It's just that the community didn't break up until I was 14 and she was 11 or 12. Whatever, we all had to move and we never saw Dogman or Werewolf again. At least my family never did again. I have no idea about the other boys, as we completely lost touch with everyone when the big moving day came. I wonder, if someone were to go checking those woods out, of course I'm not suggesting such a thing, but I wonder. I mean, this was so long ago. Can't imagine you'd find such a sight as wild golden retrievers living in the woods and walking around on their hind legs. It's so strange, almost like the memory of a dream. And yet I am certain that it happened. And I wonder if any of those upright walkers still exist. I saw a dog become a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am an ancient man who listens to your show, and I once saw a werewolf. I don't know if you want to hear my story though, because my werewolf wasn't a man at all. I saw a dog turn into a werewolf, whether you believe me or not. My wife, she used to believe me, God rest her soul. I don't know if anyone else ever did though. Nowadays, no one believes anything I say. But they don't even tell me that anymore. They just humor me because I'm old. And they pretend they believe me. Actually, I'm no longer just old. Like I said, these days I'm ancient. But when this story happened, I was still only old. I was barely in my early 60s. But I was balding with gray hair where I still had any left at all. In those days, I still lived in the house that my wife used to take care of. I was mainly doing it for this big old mutt named Rover, who my wife loved very much. I wanted to move into a retirement home, but not until Rover had chased his last squirrel. My late wife had brought him home to enjoy that backyard, and so I intended to give him the most enjoyment possible until he decided that he had had enough. Anything less felt like it would have been dishonoring my wife's memory and her intentions for the animal. I'm not really a dog person, especially not large dogs, but I loved Rover. He reminded me of the most important person in my life, who I hope I will see again when it's my time. He was also just a good guy to be around, and a reliable friend. It was during the summer when things started to get strange. There were 2 months in a row when Rover had some kind of frenetic attack on the nights of the full moon. I brought him to a vet after the first attack, and was surprised to be met by a doctor young enough to be my grandson. The veterinarian interrupted me. He laughed at my comments and suggestions. He told me that dogs don't have attacks caused by the full moon, and he charged me so much money that I found it difficult to cover the bill. I had to cut back on food and supplies in order to pay it. Needless to say, from then on, Rover and I were on our own with whatever was happening to the poor dog. Well, it was on that third full moon when I saw my wife's best friend become something from a nightmare. No, I saw him become a living nightmare. He grew. He enlarged, and his eyes glowed like they were plugged into sockets. He acted like he had never seen me before, growling and baring his fangs at me. I swear it looked like his teeth were getting longer and longer as he growled. But this was such a bizarre experience. I suppose I might have imagined that part due to all the stress of seeing impossible things happening before my eyes. After all, 2 months prior, I had got into debt for the privilege of being informed that the very thing I was witnessing was not something that I could possibly be witnessing. I mean, it cost me a lot of money to get told that, so I really wanted it to be true. But it seems I paid a ton of money to get lied to, because Rover did become a werewolf on that night. And it was the third full moon in a row in which something out of his control had been happening. This time I had to back away and get myself to safety, watching the last few seconds of the transformation from inside the house. The monstrous and hideous thing, which had once been our family dog, screamed like something from hell itself, and then it ran off into the night. I must have fainted because I woke up in the hospital. My daughter dropped by the next morning and found me lying on the carpet unconscious. I seemed to have banged my head on the way down. It was 2 days later before some of my family came out to search the woods for that dog, but we never saw Rover again. Not in either form. Of course, nobody believed my story. They blamed it on the bump on my head, but I fell after the horrible experience watching Rover become that demonic-looking thing. I fell because of the shock of seeing that dog become bipedal and run away. If I hadn't just witnessed that, I never would have fainted. It's that simple. But you're not allowed to be the logical one anymore once you're ancient like I've become. Still, I have to say that I am grateful for every single morning, no matter how many friends I know I'm going to be missing on that day. I do expect we'll all reunite when it's decided for us to do just that. I know exactly how my beautiful wife will look when that happens, but I don't know how Rover will. And that's because I saw a dog become a werewolf. Today's EP is GG. She donated to Henry and me. Please welcome our newest executive producer, Gigi, who donated to us during our recent Kathy Barrickman tribute episode. Gigi seems like a very kind and good person, and we're honored to have received that super thanks from her. Thanks, Gigi. Here to explain the different ways you can help the channel and some various perks we offer in return is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.